This video is about the independence of Ghana, the coup of Kwame Nkrumah, whether it was a CIA regime change or an internal strife that led to its overthrow. So let's get into it.
The battle has ended. And thus, Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever.
And so that's Nkrumah declaring Ghana's independence after a very long and hard-fought journey to independence. And that's after a lot of internal fighting and external fighting. And in regards to the internal fighting, the only issue was that people and some political parties in Ghana were having issues with the timing of independence. And their main reason was that Ghana was not yet ready to be an independent nation. And the transition should be done in a long period of time so that it can be smoothing out, which sounded like nonsense to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who wanted independence now. In retrospect, what they really feared was power transitioning from the British Empire to a central government that was being led by Nkrumah and the CPP. And most of the people who really feared this were the old kingdoms in the colony. That was the kingdom of Ashanti and the northern kingdoms. So, in fact, they were the patrons and the financiers of the political parties that rivaled against Nkrumah, apart from a few in the south that were like the UGCC, who were already there even before the CPP. So, in short, they were not against Ghana gaining its independence, but they were worried the power was not directly coming to them. So they wanted a federal government and not a central one. That was one of their biggest arguments. So before even Ghana became an independent country, there were factions, political parties in the countries with different agendas and different intentions for the future of the nation. And Kwame Nkrumah came on top.
It's a very full occasion. My colleagues and I are very happy to be the first members of the first African cabinet. The people of the country have reaffirmed their confidence in us and have given us the mandate to carry on and finish the job.
If you're on this channel, you have a clear idea who Kwame Nkrumah is. An elite Pan-African who wanted Africa to be free. That was his whole deal. He wanted African countries to be free and united in any way possible, whether it's a United States of Africa or economically and politically. And he also did one good thing that I like. He warned Africans about new colonialism. And looking around, I think we did not really listen. So after he took power and became Ghana's president, he worked on the path like many of his fellow post-colonial leaders like Lee Kuan Yew, who were very authoritarian in their approach to governance. So a lot of pro-Nkrumah people like to avoid this conversation that Nkrumah was authoritarian. He even led a one-party state. They like to avoid this because it makes him look bad, but that's the reality. He did that. He even had an act called the Preventive Detention Act that could get people arrested and taken to jail without any due processes. It sounds familiar to you? Here is Lee Kuan Yew boasting about his time doing the same thing.
We had to lock up people without trial, whether they are communists, whether they are language chauvinists or religious extremists.
So let's say people were not happy, especially the political parties that were there before even he came into the scene and started the Conventions People Party. Most of them were not happy because he was not very tolerative of dissent and criticism of his party and himself, which is evident. It's also evident that he was a visionary, and to me, he is the most successful Ghanaian president when it comes to policy and policy execution. He transformed the nation, which was a 19th century third world sub-Sahara African country with a very low educational rate. And you see his policy, especially his free education policies for some regions in Ghana that had high poverty rates to afford education, and providing proper infrastructure for the growth of the nation, like the building and development of the Akosombo Dam, which was going to power Ghana into the utopia he envisioned and sold to the people when they voted him into government. So you could clearly see the direction he was going, and it was evident he invested a lot in transportation, communication, the security of the nation, and energy infrastructure, because he wanted Ghana to become like what China is right now, an industrial powerhouse. And he did not just do this alone, he even built companies, factories to become seeds of this industrialization across multiple industrial fields, so that the country can be self-sufficient enough and process its own produce. He wanted to convert Ghana from a raw material economy to an industrialization and a manufacturing economy too. And he also invested a lot in the farming class. He even built state houses for them, and even set up the cocoa board, which was supposed to be aiding cocoa farmers. But nowadays, I don't think cocoa farmers are really happy about cocoa board. In fact, their relationships is always on the rocks. So apart from all these very authoritarian acts and visionary decisions and policy making and execution, Nkrumah was also very vocal on the international platform, especially after a few years of Ghana taking off as an independent country. He was very vocal and even aid and finance other countries' struggles to independence. And this got him all the wrong attention in the world, because remember, this was the period of the Cold War. The United States of America and the Soviet Union were going at it, trying to score points and mark territories across the globe. And this was the very bad time to be seen as a friend or an enemy to either of them, because you have a target on your back. And in Nkrumah's case, he was popularly known to be non-aligned, just like Switzerland portrayed themselves to be. But some Western politicians and political commentators saw him to be more friendly towards communist nations than Western capitalist nations, especially when he went against the merchant groups that dominated the Gulf of Guinea. This got him all kinds of wrong attention from intelligence bodies like the British military intelligence and the mother of them all, the CIA. So you can see in these documents that he was always a talking point in CIA meetings. If you have the directors of CIA having you in their memos, in their minutes multiple times a month, that means you are at the threat and interest level of Fidel Castro to them. And Nkrumah was truly that guy, because he kept writing speeches and aiding people's fight against Western imperialism, and that's also good, especially in the context of the British and Americans. They were really furious. And the funny thing is that he was also very friendly, even had state visits in the United States. And this comes to where this video is truly about, that his coup was not just an internal act, it was sponsored and executed by foreign intelligence bodies. So before we go into this rabbit hole, I want you to understand something. We are going to deal with organizations and bodies whose operations memorandum and philosophy is we can either, what is that order? Is it we can either agree or disagree, or we can either confirm. Yeah, we can neither confirm or deny our involvement in such acts. And remember, from the 1940s to the early 2000s, the United States of America and their CIA were involved in over 60 regime changes across Latin America, Africa, and Europe. So that's just to give you an idea. And most of them, even though they have clear involvement and the symptoms of their involvement and their regime changes were there, and they say they can neither clearly confirm or deny their involvement. So we are going to be dealing with a little bit of conjecture when it comes to their involvement in Nkrumah's coup. There are only a few coups that there's a smoking gun evidence of their involvement in, like Operation Ajax, when they took out the government of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, because they were caught easily. But these are coups post that, so by that time they've really gotten good at hiding the operational elements in this regime change era. So let's go into it. Why is it that people are saying Nkrumah's coup had foreign backing? Yes, it did have foreign backing. That's because, one, the CIA officer in charge of Ghana got a promotion right after Nkrumah's coup and even got an intelligence star. Is that the right name? Yeah, I think intelligence star for his performance in Ghana. And you don't get such an award and promotion just by sitting on your ass in Accra. You get it when you take out the biggest Pan-African in Africa. Apart from that, the quick response and recognition of the American government of the National Liberation Council, who were the military government they took over, is quite surprising when a nation whose motto is all about democracy starts supporting a military coup, a military government, in a matter of days after a coup of an elected government. And followed by this is the performance of the NLC. This is what the NLC did after they took power. They went down the neo-colonialism route. Most of the state-owned infrastructure companies were sold, privatized, and those that they couldn't sell, they even left to be consumed by bushes and rust away over the period of time. And when you do things like this, people start to realize that taking over the country was never about making Ghana a democratic country as they sold to Ghanaians that time, but it was destroying a nation that was trying to break out of the neo-colonialist structure and bringing it back into the fold of neo-colonialism to become a raw material producer and supplier to the West. And apart from this, there were a lot of other traitors too, including this man.
I made up my mind that I would come back home to submit myself to the new government that since I had been dismissed and since all ministers had been detained and since I was a minister, I had to come back and make my position known to the new government. And if I may say so, once I arrived in Accra, there was a fresh whiff of air blowing in Ghana.
A minister of state and worked with the executive arm of government, and days after the coup, he was here in Ghana praising and tooting his horns and just doing anything possible to show his loyalty to the new government. And just like any other illegitimate government, the NLC consumed itself. First, there were internal strife.
The master plan which we have discovered indicates clearly an intention of John junior officers who had planned to assassinate all senior officers to the rank of lieutenant colonel.
A coup attempt that caused the life of their leader, General Kutuka, whom the current Ghanaian airport is named after. Recently, there was a little bit of chaos about renaming it because after years and evidence to show that he did nothing in the interest of Ghana but his own and his foreign paymasters, a lot of people are claiming he's a traitor. And even though they are not saying directly, it is one of the motivations in trying to change the Accra International Airport from Kutuka International Airport into Accra International Airport. And you can see those who are in for it and those who are opposing from both aisles of Ghanaian politics. And remember, two of these aisles trace their roots back to, one of them to the nationalist movement, which Nkrumah was the head of back then, and one to the conservative movement, where they wanted to conserve the ways things were till the opportune, whatever opportune meant to them, the opportune moment for changes to come. Maybe that opportune moment would have never come. Who knows? So this is what happened. And to conclude this video, I want you to understand that it's very hard to conclude on this thing. So you have to add ones and twos to make sense of it all. But let's face the reality. Nkrumah's coup and regime change had all the same things of a foreign regime change. One, they turned the heat up. They crashed the cocoa market and sanctions on Ghana to make sure that the economic atmosphere of the nation changes, which pressures the populace into stage 2, where they use propaganda to turn the populace against the government so that the government can lose its legitimacy and mandate from the people. And finally, they put their pawns, their chess pieces into play, and the government is stopped. The people who are deceived and sold lies and dreams built on thin air in a matter of years realized that they were truly lied to. This was the same in Iraq, This was the same in Libya and throughout South America. Not to say some of these political leaders or state heads were saints. God, they are never saints. They really have some dark skeletons in the closet and authoritative actions that are really dark. But the truth is, most of their regime changes was never internal. It was never internal revolutions. So at the end, the lives of these people never got better. In fact, it got worse. In the case of Ghana, after the first coup of Ghana by General Kutukai and his cabal, the nation was sent into a spiral of regime changes that stranded the group of the country that was supposed to be the gateway of Africa and also the utopia in Africa into chaos, which I refer to as the dark ages of Ghana, where the nation was into chaos. Safety was on an all-time low because of the constant changes of power, and the military were on the loose. People's rights were being trampled on by the whims of an average corporal in the military. So in the end, you can say Nkrumah was a dictator. He was a despot, an authoritarian, but you can never say that he did not perform his duties as Ghana's first president to the highest level. He transformed the nation, and it's evident then and it's evident now, because even till today, 70 years later, we still depend on some of the infrastructures and policies he put in place. And that's one thing those who are always talking against him can never disrepute. But one thing they will also never agree to is that his coup led to nothing but despair for the average Ghanaian.